Hello and welcome to another edition of Around the Valley. This is our week one preview episode. We're excited. Football's back, getting in the roll of things. But mind you, in the fall, we've got so much more than just football, and we are going to be working to making sure we cover and show as much of it for you as possible. As always, I'm Marshall Versarian. I'm joined by Kenny Hodges. This week one's going to be exciting. Kenny, how excited are you?
We are excited indeed. Listen, week zero's in the books. We had a lot of good things come out of it. We reviewed it. We talked about it. There's a lot of good things that happened. We're rolling right into week one, and the action continues to go on, and it will be exciting. Let's go. Let's start out with the biggest storylines heading into week one. Number 4, Kennedy faces a tough test in a home opener versus Pasadena. Kennedy looked great on the road at Eagle Rock last week. Now they break the seal on their home schedule, and they will be facing a Southern Section team in Pasadena that will indeed give them a test. Another headline this week, a top 20 city showdown matchup. Number 14, Van Nuys, the Wolves will be hosting number 17, Jefferson, who come into town. This should be a good test. It'll be a litmus test that tells us a lot about what we've seen out of Van Nuys. They'll probably have a little bit of a stiffer test in terms of what their defense will see this week, but that should be an interesting story there. And also, Chatsworth and Sylmar, who didn't play in week 0, they make their season debuts this week to round out everybody in the San Fernando Valley who will officially have played a game coming out of week one. Like I said, those are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of stories. But of anything on the slate, what stands out to you storyline wise heading into week one?
Well, one of them, and I know we're going to get into later, is more of a ranking situation, and you know exactly where I'm going with this one. But we'll have to see where they come out at the end of things. But the two of the other bigger ones, Heritage and El Camino. El Camino played very well in their week 0 game in Hawaii. They had a really good showing. Now they're coming in to face a Heritage team that has not lost to a city section team as far back as I can find records. So, and that's about 15 years at this point, and I've gone back and tried to go back and find some more. It looked like they weren't playing any city section teams for a while, but yeah, they have not lost to a city section opponent, including El Camino, who they've played annually now. And I really like this. If this stays as an annual rivalry, I think this is a great matchup. So that's an interesting one. Where does El Camino stand building off of that week 0? The next one is Van Nuys and Jefferson. Both teams had shutouts. Both teams' defenses stood out. This is an interesting battle, and Jefferson destroyed Roybal. It was a 40-0 win, and that's coincidentally Van Nuys' week 2 opponent. So this is going to be a very, very interesting litmus test early in the season for how Van Nuys can go into this kind of a tough challenge. And then I guess honestly for the rest of everyone else, I just want to see how they build on what they did.
Yeah, for sure. I feel the same. That Van Nuys Jefferson matchup is very, very intriguing. Like I said, we have high expectations for Van Nuys. They were a team in the season preview I talked about. I do have championship expectations for Van Nuys this year, especially depending on how the chips fall and where they end up when it comes postseason time. But I believe in Ken Osorio and what they've been building, even though they've kind of had to reinvent the wheel a little bit from what they have been, especially offensively the last couple of years. But like I said, in week 1, it all looked the way you hoped it would look. Defensively, they suffocated. They were consistent enough offensively to get a win. But now they're going to face a tougher opponent, an opponent that's going to come into their home feeling like, hey, this is our chance to jump into the top 15 and maybe set ourselves up to be a D1 team that hosts a couple of rounds. But when we get to the end of the season, and the way you do that is obviously you handle business in league, but how you comport yourself in non-league will make the difference between being a home team and a road team when you get to postseason, right? So this is a big opportunity for Jefferson. That's going to be huge for them. Obviously, Kennedy comes in, now they're number 4 in the city section rankings. there is an expectation of what this program is and what Troy Cassidy has built. They are very, very talented, deep bunch. So usually when you get teams to this point, of course, now it's time to really test our mettle and see what we can do. And that's why you start scheduling some of these other section opponents like a Pasadena, somebody who's going to come in and give you a real test and really give you an opportunity to show exactly who you are and what you're going to be the rest of the year. I think some other things that stand out, obviously, like I mentioned, Chatsworth and Sylmar, we finally get to see their product and what they're going to put on the field this year. Chatsworth has the expectation they're going to be exponentially better than they were last year. And this was a team that even by the end of this season last year, they actually won a playoff game, but they think they're going to be better than that. So that's going to be interesting to see. And like I said, some teams who look good in week one are now going to have their first road test. Taft going on the road to Nordhoff. That should be interesting to see what they can do, test the maturity of that group. Arleta looked good in week one. They're going on the road to Bernstein, a game that we all think they should win, but when it gets tricky sometimes when you go on the road. And some teams that didn't get off to hot starts, like a Canoga Park going on the road to Hollywood, a game that they've got a good chance to win that game, and we'll see how they do. So those are some of the things. And like you said, Heritage hosting Heritage on the road at Elko. That should be interesting. And even Granada Hills and Venice. If you know about Granada Hills and Venice, whenever Granada Hills plays Venice, or when they play the Gondoliers, or when they play the Dolphins, when they play Palisades, whether it's home or on the road, those games are usually a lot of fireworks and a lot of weird things go on in those games. So that should be interesting as well. So those are some of the storylines I think are going to be interesting. But there is one storyline in particular you alluded to that I put in the notes for us to kind of break down, and that is the Birmingham Patriots that we all talked about last week. They went on the road for week 0. They went and played hard. A team that obviously they were Southern Section opponent, but they've played them, even if they haven't won in the past, they've played them well. This was the first time we saw Birmingham go on the road, and they looked, they just couldn't move the ball, and they ended up getting shut out. And as a result of that, they took a tumble for the first time in many, many years with Birmingham, where we see them almost fall completely out of the top 25 rankings. They come in this week ranked number 23, down from where they started at number 2 going into the season. Now, the question I have is, obviously, we talked about there was going to be a little bit of a rebuilding process. They lost some talent. They brought some talent in, but as I alluded to, seeing them in their scrimmage, they clearly are looking for a little bit more balance offensively, so which kind of sort of changes the identity of what we've known them to be, which has been a run-heavy conceptual team that kind of ground and beat you up. This year, they look like they're trying to be a little bit more balanced, a little bit more finesse in their attack. It didn't go well in week 0, and as a result, perceptually, it looks like they have taken a tumble. Is that a sign of trouble for Birmingham? Or is this a bit of an overreaction? When by the time we get into week 5 or 6, do you think they will have rebounded? Or is this a sign of some troublesome things to come this year?
Well, I mean, Birmingham tends to do this. Not this extreme, though, right? Where we're looking at them getting shut out and unable to move the ball. They struggled mightily on the offensive side, which even in previous seasons, we haven't seen them really struggle, right? We've seen teams keep them in check, which is different. It's one thing to have a superior talent shut you down. It's another thing to actually struggle, right? Where your schemes you're trying to figure out. And so they really struggled. I think it's an overreaction to drop them down this far. They've shown that they treat the non-league basically as a full preseason, right? Everyone else, I mean, yes, all these games count towards your overall record. It counts towards your seeding, when it comes to playoff time, what division you're going to fall into. So these games all count. But for however many years it's been, Birmingham treats it as a true preseason, where almost these games don't count, because they know it's going to help their strength of schedule. Right? They've scheduled these extremely hard teams, and we went 0-4 in our non-league. But look at who we lost to. and then they just stomp through the West Valley. So that's been their MO. I would be more concerned over the next 2 to 3 weeks how they look. Right, week 0 is for prep. It's a great week to get things going. It's a great week to see where you stand in games that count and matter. Right, everybody scrimmages before, and it's good action against someone who's not your team. But in the back of your mind, everybody knows that doesn't count. So I'm leaning much more towards overreaction. I'm curious how they do with Moore Park and home cooking. So they actually get to host, they get to be home, they don't have to worry about travel. With all of that kind of working for them, that's kind of where I'd lay more judgment after week 1 and 2.
Yeah, for me, I think I also agree. To say that they're in trouble, or that this is a sign of things of more issues, I think we got to give it a little bit more time. I think it definitely helps that they've got 2 weeks, because they're going to be off this week. They've got 2 weeks to prepare for Moore Park, to kind of get in and diagnose, go through your film, figure out what worked, what didn't, figure out where things need to improve. Maybe some things you wanted to try, you throw them out and you go back to what you know. Leaning more on Paul Turner to kind of being more of an a target man that you kind of run everything through. Those sorts of things. They are absolute fixes with the talent that this team has. And it's also hard, right? Because this is a program now that has established itself as one that they're going to get kids that kind of come in waves every year. And that doesn't necessarily always work chemistry-wise, because you've got a bunch of kids who come in because Birmingham will always be able to reach into schools around them or in other areas to get kids to come into the program. And sometimes that could be a chemistry issue. It takes the time to build that communication, that trust of knowing where the guy next to you is going to be, right? So all of those things, we got to give it a couple of weeks to figure out. And in terms of where they'll end up at the end of the year, like I said, at the end of the day, with the way that this team schedules, they still have the second part outside of Carson. They have the strongest strength of schedule of any team in the city section. So all they've got to do is put a few wins together. They're going to be right back in the top of the rankings. I don't think that off of a week 0 loss that this team is just automatically won't find their way back into the open. Like I said, if they get into the West Valley and do what they've been doing, they'll shoot right back up and they'll be right back in that top 8 area by the time all is said and done. So it's a bit of an overreaction, but 2 weeks from now, when they play Moore Park, when they host Moore Park, we'll see exactly what adjustments were made. And if they look the same as they looked at Hart, then maybe we start to stick our nose in the air and see if there's smoke there. So that's how I've looked at that. And who knows? Like I said, it just adds to a myriad of interesting things, as we talked about coming into this season, that there were always going to be more questions than there were answers. And this early in the season, we're going to see how it all unfolds. So before we go any further, let's run down the week 1 schedule. There are a lot of action. A lot of our teams are on the road. We got some teams hosting interesting litmus tests at home, and there's a bunch of good action over in the southern section as well. So I'll run down the schedule. All the action for our city section teams here in the Valley all get started on Friday. St. John Deliac will be in town for early start against Fulton Prep. Pasadena comes in as Kenny hosts them, as we talked about. Manual Arts is on the road. They're at Panorama, a team that put up 64 last week. We'll see what they can do for a follow-up. Canoga Park, after coming off their season opening defeat, they hit the road. They're at Hollywood. Los Angeles comes into town for Grant's home opener. Franklin hits the road, and they'll be at Chatsworth for Chatsworth's opening game of the season at home. Our leader hits the road. They're at Bernstein. Village Christian comes in, and they'll go take on NoHo. NoHo coming off of the Granada loss. They've got another tough test with Village coming in. Taft go on the road for the first time this year. They're on the road at Nordhoff for an interesting test there. Sylmar plays their first game of the season. They head up into the Santa Clarita Valley to go take on Saugus. Reseda is at Cleveland for the Reseda Cup. That should be an interesting one. Jefferson at Van Nuys, as we talked about earlier, a top 20 test there. Heritage at Elko. Heritage, who hasn't lost to a city section team in a while, but they'll have an interesting test with Elko, who will be playing their first game stateside after they played their season opener in Hawaii. That game's also at 7 on Friday night. And Venice on the road at Granada Hills. Like I said, at 7:30, that's a game that's always interesting when those two teams match up. And looking at the southern section scoreboard in the Valley, Sierra Canyon, they'll be on the road. They're at Chaminade Madonna. That game's actually on Thursday. Night is at CV. Antelope Valley is at St. John's at LAVC on Friday night. Montclair hits the road there at Burroughs. Burbank hits the road. They're going to go to Centennial for a matchup. Alamany is on the road for the first time this year, coming off of their heartbreaking loss to Calabasas. They're at Notre Dame, renewing old Mission League rivalry there. Calabasas hits the road there at Rio Mesa. Chaminade, off their impressive win over Oaks Christian, they're on the road at Valencia. Channel Islands comes into town. They'll take on Viewpoint. And last but not least, Crespi hits the road there at Golden Valley. So that is the week 1 schedule. We have a lot of interesting things. So before we wrap up, doing predictions is cool, right? You know me, I like to switch it up every now and again. There's so many things, there's so many directions, there's so many things and possibilities coming out of week 1. So we'll play a game. We'll play a game, fill in the blank. I'll ask you a question, you fill in the blank. After week 1, blank. So you're looking across the valley, looking across all the action, give me a prediction or give me what you think coming out of week 1 will be something we'll be wanting to talk about. After week 1, blank.
Very early, but after week 1, we're going to have 3 teams in the top 8. And we're going to gain at least 1 or 2 teams in the top 25. Right now we got 2. And I think after week 1, we get 3.
That's interesting because I was literally going to go the same way. But I was going to go a step further. I think after week 1, we'll have 7 teams potentially in the top 15. Just looking based on what we have, where we have people at, where people are sitting now. I think that if we get strong efforts from Taft, if we get strong efforts, if Kennedy and Panorama handle business, if our leader goes on the road and they look impressive, if Cleveland continues to look the way that they look, if Van Nuys handles business at home, which is possible. I mean, it'll be tough with this Jefferson team coming in. But if Van Nuys does what we think they can do, I think that all of those teams that I mentioned could be littered in that top 15, which then really sets us up to have a really interesting run of things in this early part of the season before we start getting into some of these matchups where they begin to face each other. I think that looking at the totality of the city section, there's opportunity here. They aren't outside of Carson, which I think most people would assume looking at what they just did in their week 0, where they went down to San Diego and won a game that I don't think people thought they would look well or play well, but they didn't just go down there and face a team from the San Diego section. They won that game against Lincoln, right? I think we all at this point coming out of week 0 are like, well, that's the top dog in the city, based on what we saw. But outside of that, like I said, look at Kennedy sitting at number 4. Look at what some of the teams that kind of fall in behind them. I think that it's possible that we could be having a season where we've talked about this. The Valley is right in the mix for just about every championship. Even a team like Chatsworth, you could see them jump exponentially if they look good in week 1. Same thing for Sylmar. Going to Saugus is not going to be easy. They're not going to be expected to win that game. If they can keep it within the touchdown, they won't fall anywhere in the rankings, and they'll be another team that the computers will start to look at favorably. So that's what I think. I think we could have as many as 7 teams in the top 15, maybe even, like you said, maybe even a couple more that creep into the top 20, where half that list is Valley teams coming out of week 1.
In the early let's get super excited before we really know how everything's really going to shake out. You mentioned it, so I'm going to piggyback on it. We've seen years since VST's inception, right? Our first year, for example, where 3 of the 4 championships came to the Valley. Imagine if all 4 did one year. No, and I mean, early overreaction. I think this could be the year.
I'm right there with you. Like I said, when you look at the talent, and the way that's spread across the Valley, like I said, even teams that we didn't mention. There's one game I forgot to mention that's also on that list. That's a very intriguing game. That San Fernando game, also another intriguing matchup. Like I said, San Fernando, you throw out what you saw against Heritage. We know how tough it is to play those Southern Section teams that have a numbers advantage. They have a little bit of a talent advantage in terms of the kids they can get into those programs. But even with that being said, this is still a defending city champion. And now they're going to be facing one of their coach that was on their staff last year, who's going to know what they want to do better than Coach Boo. He was the one that designed a lot of what they did offensively last year, and vice versa. They're going to know what Coach Boo's going to want to do. So expect the attitude of that game to be something really interesting for both of those teams. So, like I said, one of the things that we love is that all of our teams are putting their best foot forward. Even our rebuilding programs have showed heart and fight last week. And it's going to be interesting as we go into week 1. So that's going to wrap it up for us for the preview of week 1. We'll be right back here to review all the action after everything unfolds in week 1 to tell you everything you need to know and give you our thoughts. Like Arshavir said, continue to go to Valley Sports Telegram. We're going to be covering volleyball. We're going to be covering the girls' flag football. We're going to continue to bring you things like the power list and the Valley Gems and all the stuff for you guys to dive into as the week continues. Leave a like, subscribe, comment on this video. We're going to continue to bring you all this action right here on our YouTube channel. Make sure you follow us on our socials at VST_media, on our Instagram, on our Twitter, on our Facebook page. We upload our things there on the Facebook page as well, so you guys can enjoy everything that we're bringing to you. So that'll wrap it up for us for this week. For myself, Kenny Hodges, and Arshavir Sarian, we'll see you guys out there. Peace.